Now I would say that it's kind of taken for granted that most developers use some sort of AI code assistant and are using an agentic IDE. So, organizations need to be prepared for that. And all of that really vindicates one of Redmonk's core tenets, which is our philosophy around the new kingmakers, which is that developers are the ones who are going to be making purchasing decisions. And so if you look at how adoption of these tools has sort of evolved, you might see in several organizations that maybe developers didn't really, like their organization weren't, paying for a Copilot plan, or they weren't paying for one of these Cursor, whatever, Windsurf. But as time has gone on, they have finally gotten, but their developers were probably using them, but they didn't have like a company plan. But now, of course, a lot of companies have said, okay, wait a second, we need to actually be in control of this and make sure that our information isn't being sent to some cloud that we don't have access to. Or I think we're in the process of putting up a lot of guardrails as an industry, but also developers are only going to use tools that work well.
Welcome to the Overcommitted Podcast, your weekly dose of real engineering conversations. I'm your host, Bethany, and I'm joined by...
I'm Brittany Ellick.
We met while working on a team at GitHub and quickly realized we were all obsessed with getting better at what we do. So we decided to start this podcast to share what we've learned. We'll be talking about everything from leveling up your technical skills to navigating your professional development, all with the goal of creating a community where engineers can learn and connect. Technology is constantly changing at a rapid pace, which is one of the most exciting but intimidating aspects for professionals trying to focus on what trends, tools, and practices are most important. Today's guest is someone whose job is to help industry professionals do just that. Kate Holterhoff is an analyst at Redmonk, a developer-focused analyst firm, and we are thrilled to have her here to share about her work and how we can learn from her process to keep up. Welcome, Kate.
Hi, it's great to be here.
So let's start about just kind of discussing what does an analyst for a developer-focused analyst firm even do? Like, walk us through how you maybe approach your research or an analyst and what your day-to-day looks like.
Yes. Yeah, I get asked this question a lot, as you can imagine, because analyst is kind of a squishy term, and there's lots of different types of analysts. So the sort of longer technical term is that I'm an industry analyst. And so a lot of folks have heard of companies like Gartner or IDC, Forrester. Those are some of the bigger ones. I work at a company called Redmonk, and yes, we are developer focused. We're also smaller, and so there's only 4 analysts, and we have sort of made our name for ourselves in terms of speaking for the practitioners. And what that means is that we follow trends in the industry. We lurk in developer watering holes such as Reddit, Hacker News, Blue Sky, places where the developers are speaking their mind, and we try to give voice to that. So we speak a lot to the open source community, like we are interested in what actual adoption trends look like and not just what the vendors would like them to look like. And obviously, we spend a lot of time at conferences, and, I'm a big podcast buff. So I'm a big fan of learning what developers think by way of, hearing it. And so, yeah, that's sort of the sort of larger philosophy, is that developer-led adoption is important and we should pay attention to it. And I don't know. So, yeah, would you want me to talk a little bit about my day-to-day as part of that?
That would be awesome. Also, really curious what this data ends up feeding into and what these insights go towards as well.
Yes, great question. Okay, well, I am a former academic. So to be honest, I just want to, learn forever. And so the research part to me is super fun. But that obviously isn't it? So what we do is we've got a blog. We run our own podcast, which is called the Monkcast, and we do consulting. So companies, if they are a client of ours, will speak to us about any subject that's top of mind. So the idea is that a lot of companies want to talk to us. They want to persuade us of the relevance and the importance of their own products. But if they are our clients, we will also talk back to them. We'll give them our feedback. And so the type of feedback that they often want will be, showing us pitch decks, and we'll give them advice about maybe how to improve that. We'll talk a lot about messaging trends. I mean, sometimes companies are just interested in what we're hearing around certain technologies, and all of us sort of have our interests laid out. So, you can kind of pick your analyst that you think would be the most interesting on a particular subject matter. But also we'll do like website reviews. So, I mean, obviously that's a really important marketing channel, and it's extremely difficult. My goodness. It has to appeal to not only the business side, but also to developers who go there looking for the documentation, right? So Yeah, so we'll review any sort of marketing materials, but also, yeah, we'll just have conversations. And since the pandemic, a big part of what we do is actually creating sort of external facing media. So we'll do sponsored podcasts and sponsored videos. Also, our clients will have us come out to their conferences to speak. So we'll participate in webinars, maybe virtual, maybe live, fireside chats, things like that. And then in terms of what my work looks like, I mean, top of mind for me these days is travel. We go to a lot of conferences, which is fun, but is also a bit of a challenge. I have small children, so finding the wherewithal to leave them for days on end can be a challenge. However, I love to travel and I love to talk to people, and I think it's a lot of fun. So I do love it. So yeah, it's really a balancing act. And then also just like writing blog posts is a big part of what I do too. I always have something that I'm working on. And so I guess when I wake up in the morning, I very much look forward to trying to dig into those subjects. And like I do a lot of interviews for them. And it's so cool that, folks want to talk to me about this too. Like I have great access as an analyst to some of the leaders in the industry who want to tell me what they think about, something that is happening in the news or some new technology that is coming around, or maybe that there's like 3 folks who are working in a particular space and developers are sort of unsure why there's suddenly this influx of options and, what does that signal? So, so for instance, I'll just give you one like concrete example. What I'm working on now, which could possibly, I hope, be published by the time that this episode comes out, is on bundlers. So JavaScript bundlers. And so the reason that I'm interested in that is because we've got TurboPack from Vercel, and then we've got Vite Plus. So folks who are interested in like the roll down community, that's a big part of it, but also RS Pack. So there's all these sort of new bundlers. And I was like, why are folks investing all this time into JavaScript bundlers? Where is this coming from? And, the TLDR, as a little teaser, is that I think it has a lot to do with just the size of JavaScript these days. Webpack was created 10 years ago, and the packages just weren't quite so large. So, we're just shipping a lot more JavaScript these days. And so we needed new bundler technology to keep up with it. Anyways, a little tangential, but that's what I love about my job. I like asking those questions. I'm a deeply curious person.
That is so cool. I mean, I just love the idea of the meta of software engineering and looking at that and why these trends pop up. What's the underlying root causes? And it certainly sounds like your job doesn't get boring ever. You're doing all sorts of things. So that is so cool.
Yes.
Really curious, how did you get into this field? It seems like a very unique spot for having both the technical knowledge, but then also analyst skills. What drove you to getting into this position?
Yeah, I mean, if you had spoken to me, 5 years ago, I wouldn't have even known that this was like an option. It's such a unicorn job. I feel very fortunate to be doing what I'm doing. But yeah, I wanted to be a college professor. I had a background in art, painted some murals in Cincinnati, which is my hometown, for many years. And then I pivoted to try to be an English professor. I had dual majored in school. And so that was my dream for about a decade. And I went hard, I did the whole thing. I got the PhD. I adjuncted. I did a postdoc. That's why I'm in Atlanta, is I did a postdoc at Georgia Tech. And just at the end of the day, there aren't really any tenure line jobs. So I could have adjuncted forever. I could go out and probably adjunct right now if I wanted to, but it's just not a very good career. There's, no benefits, I'll say that much. So, if folks want to dig into the itinerant labor problem in higher education, I'd be happy to do that. But in any event, I taught myself how to program and became a front-end engineer in 2018 and did that for a few years. And one of my colleagues from Georgia Tech, who I did the postdoc with, she had gotten the job at Redmonk like immediately after deciding that being a college professor wasn't for her. And she reached out to me when they decided to hire a 5th analyst. And so, Kellyanne Fitzpatrick, shout out. So she got me on board. I was about 8 months pregnant when I interviewed for the job with my second. And so that, I got the job. It was great. It was a very smooth transition. And I was able to leverage a lot of the stuff that I did in academia with a lot of the things that I learned as a front-end engineer and the interests that I had. Like, for instance, as a front-end engineer, I wrote for CSS tricks. And so that's the sort of stuff that I was, yeah. So I was always kind of interested in combining my interests there and like using some of the skills that I had gained in academia as part of what I was, planning to do in tech. So yeah, I mean, and to prepare for that at Georgia Tech, I taught digital humanities classes, and I also taught in the tech comm section of design courses there. So I was already sort of like focusing my pedagogy on transitioning into a tech career. And, frankly, my PhD is from Carnegie Mellon. So I always have felt very comfortable talking about communication to engineers who, especially younger ones, are often not very interested in hearing about that. But I like a challenge, so that was fun for me. So, anyways, all that is to say, it was a very good fit for me. So I'd say, like most jobs I've had, I knew someone who helped me to sort of get my foot in the door, and I am extremely grateful. I love what I do. It's a fun role, and I think it's really important too.
This is awesome. I think you fit in well with us. We are all lifetime learners and very, very passionate about learning. And if I could go to school forever, I would. I am actually just now applying to the Georgia Tech Online Masters because I've had this in mind for a while, and you have been there. That's cool. It's nice to hear.
Good luck to you. Yeah.
Thank you.
I understand they have a great program for that.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have a particular specialization or anything in particular that you look at within Redmonk? You talk about JavaScript bundlers. Is there an area of development that you're focused on?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I focused on the top of the stack. So anything to do, we called it interactive when I was an engineer. So that would include not only UX, but also the design side and front-end engineers. I've always been very interested in that intersection between the design and the engineers, because that was the job that I had, was that the designers would hand off a PSD file to me or an Adobe XD file. We're talking 2019 era. And I would code it out. And of course, now AI can do a lot of that for you. And there's a lot of folks who are already sort of branching that gap. And so I will obviously talk about DevOps. I will talk infra. I can do the thing. Backend stuff is great. Databases, all of it. But my happy place is absolutely talking about front-end stuff, JavaScript, frameworks, all of that. And so, yeah, a lot of the research that I publish tends to be on that. And frankly, anytime someone markets a product as front end, so a recent example of that is front end observability. I was very interested in that. I said, well, who's using this observability product? Front end engineers don't do observability. What is this? I'm confused. It turns out it had a lot to do with real user monitoring. So anyways, I published a bit on that. I did a few podcasts on the subject because I did find it very interesting because historically, so the problem with being an analyst who focuses on the top of the stack is that vendors didn't used to market to front-end engineers. They weren't thought to have any purchasing power. You would only market to folks in the back end and who did IT and infra because they're spending the big bucks with the hyperscalers. Fine, I mean, that's not true, but there's something to be said for the front end and paying attention to their own needs, because I think the problem of just talking about developer experience is that there's a lot of kinds of developers and there's a lot of sort of specialties within there. And frankly, it's a moving target even within a subset of it, right? So I'm always wary when folks just kind of paint with a broad brush the idea of DevX. We're interested in product-led growth, or we're interested in just, making sure that developers can kick the tires, right? I think you want to also think about well, what kind of developers are we including in this larger remit? Is it also going to be appropriate for, as we widen the aperture of who is considered a developer through vibe coding or, whatever sort of cringe word folks are using? I'm all in with vibe coding, by the way, so I'll take it. I own it. That if that is something that you're thinking about, is including designers and UX folks and accessibility and all these sort of folks who are working in that, basically any web dev, then how are you meeting them where they are and making sure that their needs are met? And so I think that's I try to give voice to that particular segment of the developer community. And because I was in the trenches, because I've seen things, I've seen terrible things. I spent a lot of time doing it. I could speak with some authority And also I just get, I'm very interested in it. And so I'll pause there.
That's awesome. Yes. I think we have very different backgrounds within our group of hosts here, but definitely some more front end focused. I'm personally more front end focused, so I love seeing more efforts towards marketing to front end developers because we do have a lot to say, and I feel like there's movements now towards more like product minded engineers, which I feel like is a term that has come out recently, and I feel like that tends to be more like front end focused engineers since they're often closer to like the product and the customer. Speaking of AI, though, I'm curious because this is a thing that is happening a lot now. What are your thoughts on sort of the AI space and how that is trending over time, like specifically for developers?
Well, let me try to narrow that question a little bit because, obviously I think about AI broadly all the time.
Yeah.
So in terms of my research, I tend to do a lot of studying of the agentic IDEs. They used to be called AI code assistants, but now they're all agentic, right? Which is great. And so, for instance, I had early access to IBM's Bob. Kiro is another fun one. That's AWS's spec-driven development IDE. And so I've been thinking a lot about like what the affordances are for these tools and what they signify about the space, and like also just like putting them through their paces. I don't have a benchmark. I think that you can look to folks like Simon Willison or even some of the vendors themselves for like trying to see how well they do for certain tasks. That's fine. But again, it's always moving. It's very fluid. So I don't know, anything that you publish today is going to be outdated, in a week. But I think it's a lot of fun. And I also think that it is changing the way that we work. And it also has a lot of implications for organizations. So, of course, I enjoy doing my little hobby projects, my personal websites, little RSS feeders, silly stuff like that. That's fine. And we know that has pros and cons, and some work better than others. And, but when we think about developers at enterprises actually using these AI code assistants, there's a lot of security implications. And there's also a lot of sort of resistance from certain segments in the community. So it's been fun to like watch that evolve over time. Because now I would say that it's kind of taken for granted that most developers use some sort of AI code assistant and are using an agentic IDE. So, organizations need to be prepared for that. And all of that really vindicates, one of Redmonk's core tenets, which is our philosophy around the new kingmakers, which is that developers are the ones who are going to be making purchasing decisions. And so if you look at how adoption of these tools has sort of evolved, you might see in several organizations that maybe developers didn't really, like their organization weren't, paying for a Copilot plan, or they weren't paying for one of these Cursor, whatever, Windsurf. But as time has gone on, they have finally gone, but their developers were probably using them, but they didn't have like a company plan. But now, of course, a lot of companies have said, okay, wait a second, we need to actually be in control of this and make sure that our information isn't being sent to some cloud that we don't have access to or whatever. So I think we're in the process of putting up a lot of guardrails as an industry. But also developers are only going to use tools that work well. So I think that there's also this push-pull of like, well, that's fine, but we might be copying and pasting code snippets from our preferred, code assistants, Claude Code, whatever you use, rather than using something that maybe the top-down C-suite folks would rather us use. And I think we're still kind of figuring that out. Like there's still a lot of tension. So that's one thing that I focus on with AI. I'd say that another one is about jobs, right? We're hearing that AI is displacing a lot of workers. And that's an interesting one for me because I think that we've seen layoffs, but my personal feeling is that it's more because we're in a post-zero interest phenomena era, or ZERP, you might have heard it called, rather than AI taking our jobs. It's a scapegoat at best. And, I think that that's still, we're looking in the future for that to become the case. What I have seen as part of this ZERP thing is offshoring. A lot of companies are hiring talent from overseas. And so again, we're calling this an AI issue, but really it's not. Developers are all using it globally. But I think the fact that it's become this scapegoat in the IT industry for hiring, and for the fact that like so many junior developers are not finding jobs as quickly as they have in years past, is something that is deeply tied to that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Having been on quite a few different teams now, I know that there is never a shortage of work to be done. Even if AI can do the work, there's always something that developers can be doing. So the likelihood of AI taking our jobs, I feel like, in my opinion, is probably pretty low. But who knows? Who knows what the future holds? Maybe.
Yeah.
Are there any like common questions you get asked about AI right now from your perspective as an analyst? Or
Yeah. Well, so folks are always interested in the ROI. And that's something that I don't think any numbers are going to be effective in quantifying. I mean, we get asked that all the time, but we get asked for executive numbers frequently where they'll say, how do you know what the adoption is of this particular thing? And it's like, oh, well, you got GitHub stars and you got Stack Overflow. And it's like, oh, these are just like proximate metrics. These are not actual, things that are going to tell you anything, cut and dry. They all can be massaged to tell whatever story you think is most appropriate. So yes, I have a bit of an allergy to numbers like that. But yes, we do get asked that frequently. And gosh, I mean, we get asked about features pretty often. I'd say, one was PRs. I mean, everyone's familiar with the bottlenecks that code review pose. And so I was very interested in following that. I did write up a piece on how AI is trying to revolutionize that particular part of the SDLC. But again, it's moving so fast that I'm sure it's completely outdated at this point. It's right. Yeah. I mean, it's all just everything is fluid. Everything is moving. Again, with my podcast, usage, whatever. I listened to an interview with Andrej Karpathy on Dwarkish where he was discussing the fact that the models just aren't good enough yet to actually do the sort of agentic workloads that folks want, or that would really move the needle. And not even in terms of like AGI, but like in terms of like, replacing jobs or doing these sort of PRs in a way that's like eliminates a lot of toil and a lot of like cognitive overhead. So I just don't think that we're quite there yet with the technology to actually do much more than what we already know AI is very good at, which is, doing summary work and doing text generation and all of that stuff, which I love. I am all for it. I am such a geek about like letting, a transcript, summarizing a large block of text into something quick and readable, or like, using it so on Riverside, right? The transcript functionality, fantastic. Write me a summary anytime. I love it. That is awesome. I'm all for it. So, so I'm a big believer. But in terms of like it taking jobs and all the sort of heavy stuff that we can align it with, I'm less less bullish.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I am also a big fan of the Riverside tools. I feel like this podcast would probably not exist if it wasn't so easy now to make a podcast.
Big same.
You're not.
Big same.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's very cool. Yeah, this is very fascinating to hear about because, yes, like I said, we're more like we are still in the trenches. I feel like one of the things that I've found is I think in the last year or so, quite a few of us have been the hosts of this podcast have been looking at doing more public speaking and going to conferences and like talking about, what we're doing as developers. And I agree that things seem to be moving so fast. I'm nervous to ever submit anything related to AI because you have to submit like months in advance. And you're right, everything changes so quickly that like that could be outdated like 3 times over by the time the conference even shows up, which is very interesting. But of course, everybody wants a lot of AI related content right now.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Very hot. I suspect even with it being 3 months out of date, it'll still be relevant, especially if it's just, you just update the model. It'll be fine.
That's true. Yeah. So I'm curious more about your academic background and, is that something that you're interested in like pursuing again in the future? Like, are you interested in going further into academics again?
Well, I don't know that I'll ever go back to teaching. Just it is a lot of time. Again, it just really didn't pay enough to make it worthwhile. The numbers are not there. I try not to get too much on a political soapbox here about that whole situation. But in terms of research, every once in a while I'll submit an essay. And actually this year I published my dissertation as a book. So that was a big weight off my shoulders, or albatross from around my neck. And I actually am going to be attending like the big industry conference for my field next week in order to celebrate that book launch. So I don't know that I'll write another academic book, but I can see myself writing articles. And then this is like so I had created this digital archive about a 19th century author named H. Rider Haggard. And it was hosted on Heroku's free tier. And then when they sunset that, it went offline. So it was no longer in existence. And somehow the repo got lost, and very frustrating. I know. So I have been using vibe coding tools to like recode it out using like specs and things. And also it's in the Wayback Machine. So I've been having fun with that. Is that an academic thing? I don't know. Kind of. Like I would love to see that relaunched. But historically, I've had a real hard time getting vibe coding tools to be able to do Ruby on Rails. Like they just cannot get the versions right. It has been, I don't know, it's like an exercise in pain. But I've got the database. So I was like, well, I gotta have it in Ruby. I mean, there's no other way. Like, it's got to be a Rails app. So I actually did just get one working recently. So I am pretty stoked about it. Yeah, I know. But it can't link the images still. So I don't know, and I'm like, why am I doing this? But so does that count? I don't know. That's kind of like academic stuff. I mean, it's like, I keep in touch with those folks. I've shifted careers so many times at this point. I've got all these like friends in different like little cubby holes that I sort of try to keep in touch with, but it's hard. I think my next writing thing is of course, I write my blog at Redmonk. That's going on. But I want to write fiction. And so that'll be my next, I think, foray into pseudo academic work, I think. So we'll see how that goes.
Oh, that's awesome. Very curious on what ideas you have, or even what books you're reading currently.
Yeah, well, it's a historical fiction. So I've written 120,000 words of a novel. So we'll see.
What?
And it's, yes. So I'm hoping to get it out to a literary editor by the end of this year. And I decided, though, I needed to rewrite the first chapter. So I've been reading a bunch of stuff about Leonardo da Vinci. And so right now I'm reading Pascal, I think I'm pronouncing that right. But yes, I've been reading a lot of things about like the Renaissance, and either alternate histories that are fun sci-fi that are kind of more aligned with what my actual book is about, but also things to try to like get the historical accuracy correct. I was a Victorianist, so me writing about the Italian Renaissance is like, what am I doing? I don't know. But I did the thing. It was important. So I don't know. I love pain. This is me. Just I can't turn it off. I don't know. But yes, so that's Pascal's Angel is the book of the day. I've got, I think, 200 pages left.
I mean, you getting a PhD is all we need to know about you loving pain. So
much pain.
I dropped out of my first year at PhD. I was like, nah, that's good.
My God, Bethany, what was your PhD going to be in? What were you studying?
Computer science. I didn't choose a focus, but yeah, no, I was very much like, I like making money.
Yeah. No, you don't make money, and that's not what we do. It's different. I shouldn't say that. I do. Yeah. One of the most interesting conversations I did through the Moncast was with a gentleman named Scott Stevenson, who did his PhD work on particle physics, waves, but then he translated that to AI on speech to text. And so like he's doing like AI stuff. So I was like, who even knows what you could do with your PhD work? I was like, my God, the dude was working on like the, particle colliders. And then next thing you know, he's revolutionizing, how we're going to be using AI to do our transcriptions on Riverside. I don't know what model Riverside uses, but there's ways. I don't know that I never found a way, but maybe you could have. I don't know. But yes, it's I have lots of thoughts on all of that.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it feels like with PhD, there's a lot of skills that can translate. I mean, being able to research and have statistical, like knowledge of statistics, I think is alone a huge thing for just being effective in any area. So that's really interesting how people pivot their specific niche that they're studying to another area, because it is so niche what you end up getting into.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So one thing I am curious about, you mentioned earlier about how Redmonk is trying to like enforce that developers do have a lot of purchasing power, especially like with front-end developers and moving towards that area. But I was curious if you have any tips for how developers can better educate business leaders within their own companies and put more emphasis on their preferences and opinions for those purchasing decisions.
Yeah. I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, I would just say, if you can work at a company where you're empowered to speak truth to power, then you should just tell business leaders what you think and what you know to be true. I think the most successful companies are the ones who do keep engineering in the fold when it comes to making important business decisions. And yeah, I don't know. I would say, when that alignment happens, it can be transformative. It allows you to reduce project turnaround and, it allows you to execute business strategies in a better way, right? So, when we think about the long T in terms of like skill sets, being able to have that, the longer horizontal, right? Being able to do a lot of things well. I think companies that can kind of support that sort of learning and being able to speak to folks with a number of different abilities well, will serve them. And so again, I'm always advocating for engineers to work on their communication skills because many of them think that it's not as important as having great technical know-how. And of course, it is important. So that's like the long part of the T, right? But being able to go to your manager or folks that are making these business decisions and try to do this sort of cross-skilling and communicating across, business functions, right? They're going to be able to leverage both of those, right? Both the technical expertise and being able to speak to customers. And so when I've spoken with folks who really have studied this and like what makes startups and enterprise companies successful, they talk about walking that line. And a lot of it has to do with finding out what users need. And so if you might have the best product in the world, but if you can't fulfill a need that users have, you're still not going to succeed at the end of the day. That's great if you've got all the features. It's great that if yours is quicker than the competition, all that's awesome. But you need to be able to speak to the business needs as well. So I'd say, just making sure that you're trying to foster a community within your own organization where that sort of communication is happening is of the utmost importance. But I get that it's hard. Product and engineering teams have always butted heads, right? This is like this is a stereotype. There's probably an XKCD comic about this. I don't know. But, but they're both extremely important and they both need to align and, possibly be under the same heading. I mean, that's, when we think about DevRel and what, the folks that are within an organization who are supposed to speak to those developer users, having them be underneath the engineering team is a lot of times preferred by the DevRel folks themselves. But making sure that your metrics and your KPIs and all these sort of ways that you're measuring impact, that those also speak to business needs, absolutely essential. Like it's great if you can vibe at a conference. I love vibing too. That's my happy place. But I get it. Like you can't just do that. You have to actually do a thing with that sort of connection that you're making. That doesn't make the connection any less important. But yeah, I think it all kind of comes to the same sort of question of like, how do you, within the software industry, how are we merging this great technical ability that is whatever company you work at, right? Or, AI, right? If we're thinking at like a high level, right? How are we going to actually make this work for everybody and be responsible with it and make sure that it's, going to be a force for good, right? All of these are questions that I think are extremely important for us to be having, across a wide swath. Yeah, a lot of times engineers are sort of like the last line of like knowing what is a responsible use of that sort of power that we have. Yeah, so having them be able to communicate with the business folks is like it's absolutely essential. It might be uncomfortable, but do it and work for companies that foster that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And honestly, communication really is such a superpower in the engineering space. And advocating for those skills is really important. So really, really love hearing your perspective there. All right. I think we're coming up at time, but we always do a fun segment. And this week, I mean, you had so much, as we've talked about in this podcast, in your background that is really fun that I guess we'll talk a little more about. But really curious, what is Victorians in cyberspace?
Oh, yes. Okay. So you've been creeping on my personal website, which is vibe coded, by the way. Yeah. Well, I've taught a lot of classes over the years. So that was a course that I taught 2017 at Georgia Tech. And it was, it kind of pulls from the normal like discourse from a lot of Victorians about like how the humanities are intersecting with computers, right? And so we can, there's a lot of like monographs about how like Dickens, was thinking ahead to networking and, Babbage, Ada Lovelace, obviously the Victorians have a lot of great great stories to pull from in the history of computing, right? So that's an easy win. But in terms of like what we did in that class, like we did a lot of multimodal projects with, and it was a freshman course. So it was the sort of like introductory communication course. And we read comic books like Hatter, which is a version of Alice in Wonderland. We read The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which is a lot of fun. Maybe you've seen the movie, but it's about adventure fiction. And so like my own dissertation work touched on adventure fiction quite a bit. I'm very interested in the rise of like the Indiana Jones sort of character, which H. Rider Haggard sort of pioneered with his Alan Quatermain. And and so we also read A String of Pearls, which was the Sweeney Todd basis. And what's great about that one is it was serialized over a long period of time, and it's been digitized by one of my colleagues. And of course, it's just like a fun sort of campy, murdery, horror, whatever, melodramatic story. And so we just read a lot of fun Victorian and neo-Victorian books, and like talked about steampunk, talked about, why is it that we're still making versions of Alice in Wonderland? Like what's so cool about that story, and why can't we get over it? And, making projects that built on that and allowed us to ask questions about how the Victorians today are, extremely prescient and I guess, relevant in ways that maybe they didn't anticipate, and how we're still kind of living in the Victorian era. We're in the fourth industrial revolution, according to some thought leaders. Let's talk about why is it a revolution? What does all that mean? What are we doing with our cogs and our clockwork implements? So anyways, it was a fun one though. It was a good class. So there's parts of me that miss teaching. I'll say that much. That was it was a good time.
Man, I want to take that class now.
Well, thank you.
Awesome. And next, I understand you did start a Python learning group to make coding or learning how to code more fun. Are there any groups that you wish existed right now to make things more fun?
So here's the thing. There are probably groups for anything that I would be interested in, and I just feel like I don't have the bandwidth to join them. So I would say if, somehow I was able to replicate myself or have infinite time or whatever, Groundhog Day, do everything that I want to do, I would probably, where do we even begin? But maybe a vibe coding group would be fun, because as I do it, I have all these questions, and I'm sure I'm doing things wrong. And I'm sure I'm not like pushing the affordances of the medium. And so, my approach to that is I keep trying to like build the same app with different IDEs in different ways and different prompts. And like sometimes I use a spec. Sometimes I say, can you clone this? Can you do that? And sometimes it works. And I don't know if it's because of the IDE I'm using, or if it's because I prompted it better, or if it's because the model's better. And I have no idea. And a lot of it's a black box. And frankly, the fact that I am permitted to kick the tires and I have no token problems is I'm spoiled rotten. Because I'll tell you what, when I do pay for them, which I do, I use same.new. That's what I used for the my personal website to begin with. I've since used many other things, but I used up those tokens like in the first prompt. They were gone. Bolt.new, all of these, Bolt, V0, all of these, lovable. I am a token hoarder. Like I use them up and then I'm done. I don't know. It's tough. So yes, I don't know if I would probably be, I would have too much fun in a vibe coding group, and, trying to make I think the range of like the simple apps, like a medicine reminder or like a Tetris, make me Tetris, right? Like it knows how to do that right away because there's a million of them, right? But it's like the thing that I'm always trying to do with Ruby on Rails is like too hard. So I'm sure someone out there has like found the sweet spot of like, here's right in the middle of like, what is an appropriate sized vibe coded app? I don't know. I've yet to figure that out. So yes, having the way I describe this, it sounds more like a support group than a learning group, I'm realizing. And maybe that's actually what I need. So, okay, yes, vibe coding group. That's what I want.
I love that. We definitely need vibe coding support groups today.
Yeah.
I'm envisioning almost like going to a coffee shop with a bunch of people and aiming to vibe code a thing at the end of it and then just sharing tips and tricks the entire time. That would be so fun. I would go. And I'm an introvert, so.
I love it. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Awesome. Brittany, are there any groups you wish existed?
I feel like One that I would really appreciate is I feel like I have connected with a lot of women in tech over, especially more and more now that I'm going to all of these different conferences. And I wish that there was a group for that wasn't so, I don't know, like commercial. I feel like a lot of the women who code type groups are like, oh, and join our thing and like come to our conference and stuff like that. I feel, and it's hard to, I don't know how to put a finger on it. I read an article recently about like why women in tech isn't working or something like that. And I wish that there was a group that actually, I don't know, was better. I'll leave it at that.
All right.
I have thoughts.
Maybe someone will listen to this and give you some advice.
Yes. Maybe there's one that exists out there that already is better. So, yeah.
That is too real, but awesome. Well, that is our time this week. Thank you so much for joining us, Kate. Really cool conversations. Where can people find you?
Yes, all the normal channels, I'd say. I'm, on the Blue Skies. I dip into X every once in a while, though not there as much as I used to be. But I would say in terms of like where I post a lot of our content would be LinkedIn. So definitely find me on LinkedIn. And and then if you're a podcast buff, we at Redmonk have the Monkcast, where we have a lot of exciting conversations with folks who are, either developers or tech leaders or folks in the DevRel community, or I do a lot of news ones, so that's, if there's something interesting in the news, I'll try to reach out to like someone who like wrote the blog post, breaking it or whatever. So, so those are fun too. But I'd say the Monkcast, you can definitely hear my musings there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for tuning in to Overcommitted. If you like what you hear, please do follow, subscribe, or do whatever it is that you like to do on the podcast app of your choice. Check us out on Blue Skies as well and share with your friends. Until next week, bye.